Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I'm doing another tag. This is the My Neck of the Woods tag, which was started by Kelly over at Books I'm Not Reading. And I was tagged by Lukáš at Totally Pretentious, and I'll leave links to their channels down below, and probably to the videos they did on the My Neck of the Woods tag. So Lukáš tagged me in this, and I was really excited because this sounded like a cool kind of tag to do. And the idea is you're supposed to pick 5 books or so from the area where you live, and you can kind of define that any way you want to. And I'm just going to go with the state of Texas as the place where I live in my neck of the woods. There have been a number of writers who have spent time here in Texas, like Toni Morrison, who worked at Texas Southern University for a few years, and Cormac McCarthy lived in El Paso while he wrote some of his books. But you know, as a technicality, they're not Texans and they didn't spend a lot of time here. So I was going to focus on people from Texas who were writers. And the first author I want to talk about is a writer named Gary B. Borders. Now, Mr. Borders actually is from the town where I grew up, and he, along with some other local writers and newspapermen, are kind of the first people I was aware of that lived around me that were writers. And so I wanted to talk about or reference a book that Mr. Borders wrote called Hanging in Nacogdoches, which is essentially about a murder case that threatened to turn into a lynching against an African-American man that took place in Nacogdoches, Texas, which is arguably the oldest town in Texas. It's kind of an exploration of law enforcement and racial politics in East Texas. I think the subtitle says between 1870 and 1916. I don't actually own a physical copy of this book. That's why I have the picture over there. But I read my dad owns a copy of the book, and I read the book when I was at my parents' house one time. And I really thought it was pretty good. And I want to draw attention to kind of a local author from East Texas. And so I chose to talk about A Hanging in Nacogdoches, or I'm mentioning A Hanging in Nacogdoches by Gary B. Borders as one of those books that I think probably is worthy of a wider readership. My second book is Flight in America by Roger E. Bilstein. Dr. Bilstein was my graduate advisor when I went to graduate school. I took several classes from him, and he was an expert in the history of flight in the United States. And he wrote this book, which is part book, part textbook, a little technical, a little open to the average reader, about the history of flight in the United States. And as the subtitle says, it goes from the Wright brothers to the astronauts. Dr. Bilstein taught at a college near NASA, or the Johnson Space Center here in Houston, so he had access to a lot of information about NASA, and he wrote a lot about NASA and various parts of the space program. But this book, Flight in America, is probably the book that got the widest readership, and I really thought this was exactly what it says it is, a good introduction to the history of flight in the United States. And so I wanted to plug my old mentor's book, since he has lived in Texas most of his adult life, even though he was born in Kansas. And that book is Flight in America, from the Wright brothers to the astronauts. So that's my second book from the My Neck of the Woods tag. So those first 2 books are written by people that I have more kind of direct connection to. They're either from the town where I grew up or that I knew personally. The next 3 books in my list are not like that, but they are definitely from Texas writers. So the first book I want to mention, the first author I want to mention is, again, to mention Larry McMurtry. I think the last time I talked about Larry McMurtry, I talked about Lonesome Dove, and this is a novel that's separate from that Lonesome Dove series, and this was called Anything for Billy, which is loosely about, I believe, the life of Billy the Kid. Thanks to Lonesome Dove and The Last Picture Show and Texasville, I think he's easily probably the most famous writer from Texas that I could think of, and I have enjoyed several of McMurtry's books. Particularly Lonesome Dove is one of my favorite books probably ever, just in terms of a joyous reading experience. So I wanted to mention that. And my fourth author is Donald Barthelme. Donald Barthelme was not a native Texan, but he spent a lot of time in Texas because his dad was a professor at the University of Houston. So he grew up in and around Texas. He attended the University of Houston, and he later came back to teach creative writing at the University of Houston. So he spent a large part of his writing career here in Texas. I believe I think it won the National Book Award. And Barthelme was primarily a short story writer, and he was a fairly inventive short story writer. And if you were to look at different short story collections he has, like City Life, you'd find that there are all kinds of modernist touches, like pictures and drawings and squares, and they're written in non-traditional ways. But he was a really witty, inventive short story writer who, obviously was a fairly well-known name for a while, and I think a lot of people have forgotten about his work and career. So I wanted to mention Donald Barthelme, the short story writer who was also the creative writing instructor at the University of Houston for a while. So that's my fourth author. And my final Texas author is one of those people that I'm sad is gone for the times we live in right now, and that's Molly Ivins. Molly Ivins was a political writer, and she wrote editorials for Texas newspapers. And she kind of became famous nationally thanks to the presidency of George W. Bush, because she had a really acerbic wit and an ability to puncture the bloated reputations of politicians and their rhetoric in a really clever, very Texas kind of way. And I think she's easily the most Texas writer that I have on my list. There's a certain sense of humor you have to have if you're going to cover Texas politics, because Texas is one of the weirder states politically in the United States. I mean, we're a state where our legislature is only allowed to meet for a few months every other year, so they're not even in session every year. We're a state where we elect pretty much everybody from, justices of the peace all the way up to members of the Texas Supreme Court. We have a separate top court for civil cases and criminal cases, the Supreme Court and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. We live in a state where the governor is not the most powerful political figure in our state government, and that's actually the lieutenant governor, which makes being governor of Texas an ideal job if you want to be president, because you probably haven't done anything as governor of Texas to make anybody mad, and yet you've been the governor of a big state and can take responsibility or credit for whatever went on there. Molly Ivins had a real knack and a real sense of humor for kind of skewering Texas politicians and national politicians, and I was sorry that she left us and that she died, and then we won't get to hear what she had to. I would love to hear what she had to say about the Trump presidency and President Trump. That's my version of My Neck of the Woods tag, and thank you, Lukáš, for tagging me, and thanks for Kelly for coming up with this really cool tag. If you have any comments, or if you've read these books, or have anything to say about this video, please feel free to do that in the comment section. Thank you for watching.